here's what's not going to go well. Brady Quinn.
Uh-oh.
I know.
Your Cleveland Browns.
Uh-oh.
Yeah.
They finally done it.
Your Cleveland Browns. We've
had enough.
Yeah, it is.
Houston, there's a problem.
Yeah.
And I mean, it came from Houston.
I know.
So this is the statement from Myles Garrett, the probably going to be Hall of Famer of the Cleveland Browns.
And he quotes.
Says, as a kid, dreaming of the NFL, and all my focus was on the ultimate goal of winning a Super Bowl, and that goal fuels me today more than ever. My love for the community of Northeast Ohio and the incredible fan base of the Cleveland Browns has made this one of the toughest decisions of my life. These past 8 years have shaped me into the man who I am today. While I've loved calling this city my home, my desire to win and compete on the biggest stages won't allow me to be complacent. The goal was never to go from Cleveland to Canton. It has always been to compete and win a Super Bowl. With that in mind, I have requested to be traded from the Cleveland Browns. Signed, Myles Garrett, number 95. And Jimmy Haslam, way to go, buddy. $230 million gets you a weirdo at quarterback who plays about 11 snaps and says bye-bye to a Hall of Famer who doesn't want to be a part of the clown show any longer.
That being said, and I want to say this, thank you to from a Browns fan, a former Browns player, for everything that he's done. He's a tremendous player. He was everything that they drafted him to be and they hoped he would be. I think he will be a Hall of Fame player. But the reality of the situation is
he's gone?
This is coming at the right time.
Okay.
And reason being is they're going to be in cap hell because of that Deshaun Watson contract and trade. So because of that,
it's a good leverage point.
It's not even a leverage point. It's just good timing for the team if they're trying to rebuild and get their cap back in the right position. Not only are they going to unload his contract, but you're most likely going to see them at some point move on from Deshaun Watson, have to carry that cap hit. And so at least in this case, you're going to probably be getting 2 ones in exchange for him. He's still the best or one of the best defensive players in the league, and he's got 2 years left on his deal, which is valuable, too, to any team trading for him, knowing that you don't have to necessarily strike a deal with him right away. So I understand where he's coming from. I mean, this is a position that Joe Thomas kind of held this position, right? Leader of the team, future Hall of Famer, and he wanted to stay in Cleveland. He wanted to finish his career out there. That's admirable. But we also shouldn't knock Myles Garrett for wanting to try to have a shot at winning a Super Bowl elsewhere when, this is a team that just isn't serious right now about trying to win a Super Bowl based on how they have handled everything with the Deshaun Watson situation.
And he would have to be strategically sound in his approach because, I mean, he's had his moment in time where people could be like, hey, man, you're, be happy being here. Like, we embraced you through it all.
Why? What happened?
I mean? Well, they embraced him through it all. I mean, he had
to deal with.
He had a weak moment. His helmet was in his hand or somebody else's. I mean, I'm just saying they've embraced him through his ups and his downs, and fans aren't really sensible when it comes to I want to move on from your team. Right. It's more like you stay loyal to us, we stay loyal to you until one of the two things happens, right? Until the team gets rid of you or you want to leave. It's like one of the two things. So I'm just saying to all the fans out there, listen, you just got to understand that Cleveland has really put – the ownership has really put the pressure on not just Myles Garrett, on any player that's on that roster that wants to win, because it's this could be one of the most insanely clear and logical, legit reasons that you could sit there and say, I have to do something that you never want to hear a player on your team say, is that I'm turning my back and turning the page on this chapter of my career. I mean, It just seems logical.
To that point, I would not be surprised if there's not one or two other players that do something similar. I think they all see the writing on the wall of where the Browns are in right now, their cap situation, not able to do much. Not only, by the way, of not bringing in free agents to potentially help out this roster, but also just for them to get extensions. It's going to be tough, again, when you've got a lot of money tied up into a player who's not going to be helping you next year. We know that for sure with his Achilles injury. but maybe not on the roster at all, depending on how this all works.
Are they going? It was there reported $90-some million that they're trying to recoup in the scenario. Is that accurate? Is that true? Is that out there?
It's out there, but I don't know if there's any validity to it.
I also think because I can understand the idea that a fan base would get a red ass over, oh, you don't want to be a part of this? You want out of this situation? I actually think the Browns fan base is kind of in a unique spot because I think from the get-go they felt kind of icky about this whole pairing with Deshaun Watson. And to see how it plays out, there's probably a segment of the Browns fan base and that population that's like,
I want to trade too.
Yeah, we get it, dude.
Trade me away too.
Listen, can we go? Like we get it. The whole thing's been a disaster, and it's why one of the things that I don't think has really been talked about, and we brought it up on this show before, it's not just the decision to pay Deshaun Watson and him not playing, what that means to his reputation. Dude, there's so many careers in Cleveland who were altered because of that.
Right.
Like players who never got to see playoff success or whatever, and when they did, it was Joe Flacco who brought it. How many coaches have been clipped because of it? How many? I don't think we're done seeing the fallout from that decision made by Jimmy Haslam.
You know what would be an interesting concept is if you had a true fan market, where if you're part of a certain deal to your team, like there's this entire NFL pool of each franchise that has market share, and when you're an investor in season tickets and different things that are connected to the franchise, that it shows that either the stock is gaining more momentum and gaining more value, or you may want to sell that stock and go for a different stock within that marketplace. How cool would that be to be able to see what the fan base really looks at and what they value? Like, oh, I want to trade my Cleveland stocks to you. I would like to gain market share with the 49ers. Like, I'm going to take a chance and, I'm going to look at the Rams, and I want to gain market share with the Rams. That would be really cool if you could see a market share that's directly connected to the fan bases of a team.
If they're basically publicly traded stocks.
Right?
Yeah.
I think that would be super awesome because, to me, you can't get arrogant enough. I think the point of making that point is a franchise should never, you look at the Cowboys, you should never be so arrogant about your team and what you look at as the value of your team where you lose sight of the fact of why you do what you do. And that's to bring in players that make your team good enough to be able to compete ultimately for a Super Bowl title. That's what drives your fan base. You give them hope. That's what gives them the ability to be able to cheer and buy the apparel and buy the season tickets and all the experiences. Yet you don't see those decisions being made by these franchises. It's seems like it's everything but that. You try to get by. And you get by because you do see the impact of, okay, the Cowboys are one of the most valued franchise in the NFL and in all of sports. How is that? How is it that you have such a poor product, but yet that product continues to gain more momentum and more value? There's no real incentive to change how you approach what you're doing. There's no incentive because you're getting the results that you want. It just seems interesting, the dynamics of making a decision like the Cleveland Browns did and ending up in a situation where one of your best players in the history of the entire organization wants out. It's just a sad commentary.
If I may provide some optimism for Cleveland Browns fans, this would be it. Again, you're probably going to get a couple first-round picks and something else for him. That's how good of a player he still is at his age, production, even the contract situation. The other thing I'd say is if you look at Jim Schwartz as a defensive coordinator, and maybe you subscribe to this, LaVar, maybe you don't, but with Myles Garrett, you're a guy who's going to get double teams. He's going to get all of these scheme, changes you're going to make in your pass protection, run block because of how good he is. You lose that, obviously, when he's him not being there, and you lose the ability to rush forward and maybe get home with that. Jim Schwartz likes to bring pressure, though. So I'm not saying that like when you have a guy like him and you've got a coordinator who brings a lot of pressure that he's not valuable, because he is, and especially how much more impactful he makes things if you can get him in one-on-one situations. But when you have a coordinator like likes to bring a lot of pressure, though, it nullifies it a little bit. You know, there's like the old days of like the Seattle Seahawks back when they just rush 4, play their cover 3, and that was it. They're going to get home with their rush, right? That's not what Jim Schwartz does. So I think from a schematic standpoint, if I was like looking for a bright spot, it's like, well, you've got a coordinator who knows how to adjust around not having that like game changer at defensive end. I think Jim Schwartz can still, you know, figure out a way of getting pressure on opposing quarterbacks despite not having Myles Garrett. Now, again, not ideal, but I think we could all understand why Myles Garrett wants to be somewhere else.
How many teams in the NFL have a better roster than Cleveland?
Not many.
Yeah.
Philly? Is it like
I just
a handful?
think and when you say those types of names, like when you lead off with a Philly, that is like an anomaly. I would say the Philly roster is like you don't see that type of roster around the league.
What a waste.
You don't see that from top to bottom, from back to front on both sides of the ball. You don't see a Philly roster around the league. So when you say Philly and you look at roster-wise what Cleveland has or what the Jets have, which is funny because one of those teams wins and the two other teams are pretty much in the same exact situation and circumstances. You work that one out. But there literally are probably 2-3 teams. Maybe 2.
Philly for sure.
San
Fran's roster's up.
Close.
Detroit's getting there, the way they've built up some things.
Close.
When healthy. I would say
the Jets.
The Jets is
Baltimore.
up there. Baltimore.
That's a good one.
But, like, these are teams that, like, shouldn't be picking number 2 in the draft.
No, they shouldn't.
And it's because of a move that they didn't have to make that they did.
Yeah. I mean, it's one position that they're lacking.
Well,
I don't know, but it's interesting. And to Q's point, I mean, he's 100% correct. I mean, when you do have a scheme, you know, edges are now becoming such in demand that there are a ton of guys that are comparable if you have the proper scheme. In fact, you're platooning guys even with those elite edge rushers to that point. So they probably will look at it from the standpoint of bringing in somebody out of free agency. I mean, you see somebody like Von Miller who's on that same level of a pass rusher as Myles Garrett has been. He's at the end of his career, and yet is still a very valuable piece of Buffalo's defense, yet it's a platoon situation. So Myles Garrett is definitely a 3-down defensive end. He can play the run as well as be a great and effective pass rusher. But to the point, you can get 2 guys that are affordable. You could get 3 guys within the contract of what you have with Myles Garrett and get a platoon situation where this guy is purely a pass rushing edge. This guy is more of a take on a set the edge, take on the run type of player. You can get a 2-for-1, almost like running backs at this point. You can get a defensive end. You can get edges by committee in today's league.
I mean, trade for some PhD. I mean, that's always the great equalizer in any trade.
Well,